people compare our brains to computers quite a lot. You're somebody who would really know how similar they are.
Right.
I mean, are they? I mean, are they that similar?
Well, it depends on what you mean. At a sort of basic level, no, they're not similar at all. So the thing that I think gets confusing for the average person, and not just the average person, it also is a point of confusion for many scientists, is that the actual definition of a computer is a very general, abstract definition that is really more of a mathematical definition of what it means to do any kind of transformation of some inputs to a set of outputs using a fairly mechanical recipe. A computer is something that can do that in a mechanical way. And in that way, our brains and our laptops are both computers. Our laptops can take inputs like the keyboard inputs we give it, the mice, etc., and it can produce outputs, what we see on our screen, what comes out of the speakers, and it does this according to some fairly well-defined mechanical rules. Where a lot of people might be less comfortable recognizing this, but all of the data points to this, is that our own brains, likewise, are effectively mechanical systems that transform our sensory inputs into the behaviors that we generate. And in that way, we are just computers. But where we're not computers is when you actually look at how our brains do that. What are the mechanical operations that happen in our brains versus what are the mechanical operations that happen in our laptops? And those operations are radically different. They might have some similarity at a very abstract mathematical level, but when you actually look at the nuts and bolts or the guts of it, as it were, they're not at all the same.
So could a computer ever be as intelligent as the human brain?
Yes, we have no reason to think that that wouldn't be the case. I mean, it should be said that despite what I just said about the guts of our laptops, a lot of the advances in artificial intelligence in recent years have come from attempts to more closely replicate, in part, what happens in our brains. And it's still a very loose, abstract fit, but it does look like we can capture some of the basic functional operations in our own brains on a computer. And this is what allows our computers to do things now like recognize objects and images, translate speech for us, drive cars, etc. And at this point in time, there's no reason that we have ever been presented with to suspect that there are any things that our brains do that a computer couldn't do if provided with the appropriate mechanical recipe for transforming the inputs to the outputs in the way that we do.
But it could never be kind of empathetic or sympathetic, could it? Could a robot do that genuinely?
Well, why not? I mean, it's a funny thing. What is empathy? So empathy means that when you see someone exhibiting certain behaviors, you first make an inference about what their mental state is. So you've engaged in what we call a computation. You have taken a set of inputs, which are your sensory stimuli. You see the person crying or whatever, and some mechanical process happens in your brain where you infer that they feel sad. And then what makes you an empathetic person is if you take that inference and then you act on it in order to try to change your behavior to reflect the fact that you feel bad for them somehow. But to feel bad for them simply means that you don't want them to feel bad, really. And again, that's a mechanical operation on some level. And we know this because we know that we can manipulate that. You know, people who suffer brain damage or who are on different pharmaceuticals will have changes to their empathy. So empathy is something physical, something mechanical embedded in our brains. And if that's the case, then theoretically, if you figure out what exactly that operation is, you could replicate it on a computer.
So did you just say that certain drugs can change a person's level of empathy?
Oh, certainly. I mean, you know, we all, I think, have heard stories. Now, I think some of the stories are maybe more or less true. There's some controversy about exactly what the drug oxytocin does. Oxytocin is a naturally occurring hormone in the brain, and it has many properties, one of which seems to be to promote social bonding. And there's some possibility that it can increase empathy when you're interacting with someone whom you have an existing connection with. But there's all sorts of complexities around it. On an even more gross level, though, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but if you've ever seen a party full of people on MDMA, their empathy levels are very different from before they were on the drug. And that's ultimately just because of a small trace of a chemical in their brains that's changing the mechanical operations in their minds. It's not magic, it's physical. And that is good evidence that our empathy is itself physical.
I've never seen a party full of people on MDMA, but I'm going to take your word for it.
Okay, take my word for it.